This video is an excerpt from a recent astrology class in which I looked at the chart of Matthew Perry, a famous Hollywood actor who unfortunately passed away recently due to a catastrophic health event. And so, as the video continues, you will then see the similarities between his chart and the chart of our disgraceful ex-president. Matthew Perry, he became famous through his role in Friends, which is a show that started in the late 90s and then went into, I think, the early 2000s, and he passed away unexpectedly and very suddenly recently in October, late October. And when you look at his chart here, first of all, just looking at his chart, as if you're saying, well, is there something in here that points to an actor, well, Leo rising, person with Leo rising and the Leo sun in the first sign is pretty much automatically a performer, an actor. Think of the Leo is the natural fifth sign, so that's where you play, you act, you play sports, you perform. It's the house of children, and it's also the house of the natural performer, right? So that, of course, fits, but even more, to add more substance, more energy to that, you would then point to the fact that the sun, if you recall when we did the talks on harmonics, the sun is very precisely 72 degrees from the moon. Now, that you have to get a program to give to you, otherwise you have to do it mentally, which is not a bad idea. What I do is I get the program to show me where the fifth harmonics are, but then I'll scan it and you can see that it's 60 degrees if you count Virgo and Libra. Once again, playing with numbers. Then you add another 4, roughly here, 64, 71 and a bit. You're almost at 72. So he's got a sun, moon, fifth harmonic. This is the classic aspect that reinforces acting, basically creating. Any person with sun, moon, and fifth harmonic is naturally creative and adopts a certain style of expression that is very expressive of their humanity. It's the most creative energy. Remember that I talked about how it's the pentagram, and will incline the person even more than if you just took Leo rising with the moon somewhere else. The fact that you've got a fifth harmonic adds to that. And then, you can't quite see it here. Let me see if I can make this a little smaller. Okay, so there you see that he had a Mars. His Mars was out of bounds. That adds to it, and adds to its strength. It adds to its expression. And any out of bounds planet basically gains momentum, gains importance in the person's makeup. And Mars is, first of all, in Sagittarius, trining the ascendant in the fifth sign, which the fifth sign corresponds with Leo in the natural chart, because you would start with Aries, Taurus, Gemini, Cancer, Leo. So this means added fuel to the acting, performing, creating, right? And trining the ascendant is very smooth, in that fire with fire. Sagittarius is fire, Leo is fire. So that adds to that. And you also know this person. You might say, well, okay, great, that's acting, that's performing, that's, you could say, the expressive, naturally creative side. What about the work profile? Well, first of all, Saturn opposite the moon you're really highlighting the Saturn. Saturn opposes the moon, working, ambition. I want to be something. I want to develop something. I want to work on something. And there's a story of him. Apparently, and this would be for the next thing that I'll mention in the chart, a point in his life where he wasn't doing well, and he prayed. He prayed to God, and he said, God, I don't care what you do to me, just make me famous. Now, that would be the logic that Saturn, you put it in the 10th. And one of the ways you interpret Saturn is, in fact, this goes to an astrologer from the 20th century, let me think of his name, Mark Edmund Jones. He called it a place where you overcompensate. In other words, there's a feeling that I'm lacking something there, so I need to build something there in order to feel better about myself, which actually can be incredibly useful, because if you use ambition correctly, then you can build things, you can create things, you can make things happen, in quotes, both for your illumination, your benefit, and the benefit of others. So Saturn there is reaching for a career, wanting to be famous. Opposite the moon, it's going to be a persistent feeling. The moon is one of the most immediate. It's a daily influence. It's what you feel like all the time. It's your natural comfort zone. So Saturn, opposing it like that, it's going to be intense, and it's going to draw him into that part of his life, namely the career area. And of course, you also have to always consider the other side of the coin and always ask, okay, so that's great. He's got ambition. He wants to make something happen. What could be the problem with that? That could tilt toward the very thing you want, and until you have it, and arguably forevermore, because even when you get it, you'll have set in motion a way of being which could haunt you, which could follow you all the time. In other words, the Saturn opposite moon, or Saturn anything, can correlate with never being happy, because you never have enough. It just never reaches the point where you can say, all right, relax. It's there. You've got it, right? So then Saturn opposite moon can tilt toward depression. Depression being something that is restricted, hemmed in, less than, and it's an actual tangible feeling that you can feel in your gut, in your heart, like in the center of the body, even in your mind. It could be there as a factor. Now, the thing about this guy, that having said all that, might even be more dominant, is that he was born with a Sun, Neptune square. You can see it there. Once again, the numbers. What are you doing? You're looking at 26. Neptune is 2558. It's practically a 26. Very tight Neptune Sun square, which, your eyes looking at the chart, they go to the fact that the numbers are late. You spot and okay, they're square. So forevermore, he's born with a Neptune Sun square. This is a persistent pattern, just like the Saturn Moon opposition is persistent. Now, Neptune Sun square, the upside of it is more creativity, imagination, connection to that realm, person's whole life. Now, it can be on the very high end, it's a very spiritual energy, the Neptune. On the low end, however, Neptune is an escapist type of energy. It can also, in his case, for example, given that he wanted to be famous as an actor, the Neptune is the seeking of celebrity status. So that would add to the Saturn opposite moon craving for fame and notoriety, which would be the Saturn up here. But the Neptune in a square then links it to celebrity as well. But the escapism, the classic avenue is alcohol or drugs, which he had a major problem with throughout, apparently, from what I hear, at a younger age. Apparently then he stopped. I didn't do enough research to find out when he stopped. And now this is where you can really learn astrology through something that in the old days, in quotes, you'd have to do, serious research by going to the library, if you were lucky, maybe on Occult Shop. Finding data in the 20th century, let's just say writ large 20th century, not to mention, I sometimes wonder about astrologers in the 16th century, because they just didn't have access to the data. But now, go on Wikipedia, perhaps, or maybe somewhere else, start digging around, which I haven't done in this case, but I would need to do, to figure out, well, when did this guy quit using intoxicants? Because that's how you learn how planets work. And typically, you would notice that when that happened, Saturn was very active. Why? Because Saturn is the planet that will sacrifice something today for a greater result later. It's a planet that works at things, restricts and restrains, and says, stop this in order for things to get better. So people tend to, nearly always, if someone goes on a diet because they want to be in better shape, they won't do it under Jupiter. Jupiter does not like working. I've used this phrase numerous times with people. If you want to understand Jupiter, Saturn, Jupiter is the party planet. Saturn is the planet that works. So you would go looking to see when did he do that, because then as inevitably you find Saturn, you realize, yeah, right, this is the way Saturn works. And that helps you to understand your own Saturn when it's traveling in your chart, so that you give it meaning. And for example, if you're experiencing a Saturn period and you feel the energy of it as perhaps at first you're not feeling so well, you're feeling depressed for whatever reason, but then you realize, well, it's time to get to work, because that's what Saturn is, and so I'll do something to make myself feel better, which typically at first you make yourself feel worse because it takes discipline and so forth, but then you start to feel better because you're connecting to the high end of Saturn. So now, all of this so far is describing the natal situation, his inclinations and so forth. But then your next question becomes, well, what happened here? Why? You know, because this guy, I mean, he's not young anymore, but he's not old either. I mean, he died in his 50s, so you'd have to consider that a young age. And so then you're looking at, well, what happened? And so there you go to where the planets were, and I've drawn them here. And so you've got the Uranus in the 20-degree Taurus range, Jupiter up there near the zenith, fairly close to the Saturn, but a little forward of it, and so on, Neptune, Saturn, Pluto. But now I'll turn to this one where it shows it a little more clearly, this slide with the ephemeris. So what you spot, and this again would be, and I could tell you that in my case, when I saw the chart, it was immediate. I put the lines here not to illustrate, but I immediately noticed that the sun, which, you know, person's sun is their primary planet always. Core vitality, the core being, the energy, it's all there. It's a very, very powerful point in anybody's chart. So you see it at 26 Leo, you know that Neptune and Pluto, both of these planets, are, as I explained earlier, from the 150. They're doing a 150 to the sun. Now, in the case of Neptune, you see that it crossed through there pretty much the whole year. Up here, it wasn't quite there, but then it reached 27, almost 28, and then it backtracks. And of course, the other thing you do is you realize, okay, that's where it is now. You also can look at 2024. Next year to see that it's still there, and even as you can see that even as late as the end of 24, it's still working those degrees, because it's still 27 is with an orb of 26. So this Neptune is extremely active by 150 to the sun, and Pluto likewise this year, in that you see it at the beginning of the year 27 plus, now it's 28. It's a little past, but definitely not out of the woods, so to speak, when someone is considering this, especially because the Pluto in his chart, number one, it's in Virgo at birth, so he's born in a generation where Virgo being a health sign, remember the 6th, right? Natural 6th. That Pluto carries health energy, and it's transiting through the 6th, which is the health house, which is the natural Virgo house. So this is a threatening situation around health for sure. And then Saturn is transiting through the 8th. The 8th is Pisces. That's the death house. And it's in 150 in this direction over here to Uranus and to Jupiter. Jupiter being the natural ruler of Pisces. So this Saturn is another problem planet in this situation, for sure. And now there's where you're looking at 23. Saturn in 23 enters Pisces, and this, by the way, is another rule that I will often dwell on when I'm talking and repeat it, hoping that people will pick it up and practice it, because it really shows you how astrology works. Once the planet enters the sign Pisces and reaches these degrees, so you know that, again, by the numbers, Saturn, early Pisces, enters in the spring, got all the way to 7, backtracks, and comes all the way back to 0, and then we'll go forward again and eventually, get beyond 7 degrees, which will be beyond this Jupiter and so forth. But most of 2023, the whole year, Saturn is aspecting these planets, meaning that until once a degree is touched by a transit, until the transiting planet, in this case Saturn, gets completely beyond those degrees, you're in the aspect. And what can happen to you happens anytime during that period. So he's vulnerable to the Saturn in a 150 aspect, in the 8th sign, to this Jupiter-Uranus conjunction, practically all of 2023, as well as parts of 24, because it'll take a while for the Saturn to get a little bit further and leave that aspect, right? So on Saturn, Neptune, Pluto, that's more than enough for a serious problem to occur, such as this, right? And the Jupiter itself, what you notice about it is that there's through a square. When the event happened, Jupiter, which is the ruler of the 8th, was in square. It was right at the top of the chart, square the ascendant. So the ascendant is 11 degrees, so you have a Jupiter square. Now there's where you see that the 10th is a very public house. It's the most public of all the houses, right? It's up there in the firmament. So essentially, Jupiter, the 8th sign, this is the poetry, in this case very dark poetry, obviously, of astrology. Jupiter rules the 8th. The 8th is the death sign. It's a very public death, right? It becomes something that many, many people hear about. And, it's showing you too that just because you see Jupiter somewhere, don't always assume that it's a positive thing, because it's not, especially in a square, unless you posit that perhaps he's in a better place now than he was before, which...
Andre?
Yes.
Matthew Perry was 52, and after 15 attempts, he finally seemed to stay
52? 52. Okay, well, I'll look that up. Thanks for telling me. And so that would be, it's been recent then, right? I believe.
Yeah.
Yeah, because he died at 54, right? So, yeah, that's okay. So I'll look that up. That would mean that, okay, well, you see, okay, so right away, even without going with more precision, what do you see? That happened when? When Saturn was in Aquarius, right? Because, how do you know that? Because now it's in Pisces in 2023. 2 years ago, Saturn's in Aquarius. Saturn in Aquarius opposes Leo. That's when people feel the Saturn most conjunct square oppose their sun. So the odds that you find out that someone makes a big move in some direction to change something in a major way, the odds increase when Saturn is in that place. So this verifies the very thing I was just talking about earlier, that you would expect Saturn to do that, to put him in contact with his discipline side to make the change. Now in this case it didn't turn out. And there you get into, if you were thinking, well, why did it not work out for him? There it gets complicated to explain it. Deep patterns of karma, it's complicated. One thing that can happen to a person though is that when they're under hard aspects like this, they could do something that isn't particularly wise. One theory of what might have happened here is that, according to the story, he had been playing pickleball, or he had been exerting himself a lot in the hours just before. He then went into a hot tub, and when you go into a hot tub after you've been exerting yourself a lot, what can happen is that in the relaxation of the hot tub, in that case, following a lot of exertion, keep in mind that if he spent years, in constant drug use, alcohol, etc., then he might have, for example, in his arteries, there might be a lot of plaque and so forth, and you can release a clot that'll kill you instantly. It could be, in fact, they call that a cardiac arrest. No, I don't know the 100% story. Now, it turns out, though, that the one thing that, again, dark poetry, what effectively killed him in this case is that he drowned. Now, drowning, where do you look for drowning? That's Neptune. Neptune is the lord of the ocean, the lord of the sea, and whereas Neptune here squares the sun at birth and rules the 8th, which is the death house. So there are all kinds of astrological correlations here that you can see. It's very rich in terms of describing it, right? But now, let's say that we'll stop there with Matthew Perry. Ton of information, very rich chart. But the thing that catches your eye about this is, who else do you know that's got a action in these degrees? Well, it's this guy. It's why I've been mentioning so many times how much his health is at risk, because he's got the very same pattern, Neptune and Pluto, this year and next year. I'm showing it for 24 here. Now notice that Pluto next year enters the year in late Capricorn, but then goes into Aquarius, and these degrees are not helpful to him either, because if you take these degrees and you add, it doesn't look like anything's happening, but if you take these degrees and you add 45 to them, it takes you into the middle of the mutable signs, which then will reach the Uranus, for one. And if you wait long enough, it would eventually get to his sun and moon, if you go to the 5-6 degrees of Aquarius. The point being, though, that it's not helpful in here, but by the same rule that a planet is not through the degrees until it's done with those degrees, well, then you can take this and you can extend it. He's in the aspect the whole time, because back here, or rather forward here to September, October, November, you get another hit to what? To the ascendant degrees. His ascendant is very late Leo, and Pluto is very late next year, so it's to the ascendant, right? But this year, it's been to the Mars, right? So by next year, you move this line to there. Mars and ascendant are near each other, and Neptune, you can see it. Next year, it oscillates between the Mars and the ascendant the whole year. It even goes into the year after. So this is really dangerous stuff, right, to play with, given where the planets are. It would be true, by the way, irrespective of the fact that, irrespective of the conditions, meaning, he's a politician, he's under a lot of pressure, etc. He'd be dealing with this regardless, but the situation he's in probably increases the danger, because he's probably feeling a lot of stress, even though he's very shameless and he's a career criminal, blah, blah, blah. Still, this is dangerous, right? And then it ties into the fact that this argument ties into the fact that, okay, fine, so these two are definitely problematic, but this bringing up again when I was discussing this theme with astrologer Patrick Watson, who stated in a channel visit that Jupiter-Uranus conjunction in April would be potentially helpful to him through authority figures like judges helping him out and so forth. And this perception that this guy gets away with everything, and so then because Jupiter and Uranus, he actually read it to the midheaven. So look, they're conjoined, they're near the midheaven, and this is going to help him because the midheaven, the 10th too, it's the place where authority figures are, the people that make decisions. So this is what it would be. But what he didn't say, and I said it later in my channel, is that Jupiter-Uranus, they're actually conjoining at 21 degrees, right, of Taurus. So therefore, if they're conjoining at 21 degrees of Taurus, then they're 150 to the moon. And that really adds to the health profile because 150 is a health aspect, health and death, and Jupiter at his birth rules the 8th. Uranus opposes the moon, so it's a very dynamic planet. To my mind, it's a dangerous planet because of that. Plus, Uranus at birth opposes the moon, which is the ruler of the 12th, which is a definite health house. I mean, that's where you go to the hospital in the 12th. And so you've got a pattern here that is very risky. Not to mention that in the middle of the year, Saturn will reach 19, which is really close to squaring the moon. Once you get a station, you see it at 19, you can definitely count it to a planet that is 2 degrees away from there. And even the sun is not that far away. So bottom line is that particularly through the pointing to the ascendant and to Mars, and then the Leo is the connection to the cardiac event, the Leo being the heart.